What's up, guys? Today we're going to be talking about how to figure out how many calories you have to eat. So calories are the king for weight gain or weight loss. If you're in a calorie surplus, you're going to be gaining weight. If you're in a calorie deficit, you're going to be losing weight. Figuring out how many calories you need to eat to do those things is a little bit more challenging. So the first method, you could utilize a calorie calculator such as MyFitnessPal or use an online calorie calculator. Basically, you're going to be entering some of your stats, your height, your weight, your age, gender, activity level, body fat percentage, and it's going to shoot out a number for you. To give you a basic idea, I have a calorie calculator pulled up here. I'll have a link down below to this website. This is good friend Tomination Time's website. I plugged in some of my information here, and I want to go through a couple different calculations to illustrate. But essentially, got my information, click TDEE after you've entered that all in. And on the right-hand side here, it'll show your TDEE, your total daily energy expenditure. This is how many calories you burn in a day. Remember, it is an estimate. So this includes things like your exercise, your non-exercise activity. So as you're fidgeting, moving around, getting steps in throughout the day. It includes your metabolic rate, which you'll see is highlighted up at the top, as well as your thermic effect of food, how many calories you spend digesting and using the food that you're eating. And so once you know how many calories you burn in a day, that's essentially your maintenance. If you eat the same number of calories in a day that you burn, you're going to maintain your body weight. If you eat above that, as shown below, you will gain weight. So a 250 calorie surplus above maintenance causes you to gain half a pound a week. 500 calorie surplus, 1 pound a week. If you eat below your maintenance, that's when you start to see weight loss. So this seems pretty simple, right? Why don't we just rely on the calorie calculator and just do this? Why do we bother with anything else? Well, because it's not that simple. Unfortunately, the reality is oftentimes when you use a calorie calculator, it's not going to get you to where you need to be. And that's because it's based on so many estimates. Every single one of those variables that I showed you can have an impact on what your calories look like. And so to illustrate, let's just adjust something like weight. So if I plug 180 pounds in there up from 172, calorie needs go up. So if for whatever reason you're overestimating or underestimating your weight, your calorie needs are going to change. You could also change it by a large amount, your activity level. So if I go from sedentary to moderate exercise, boom, that's bumped up my calories almost 700 a day. So that's very, very significant. And when you're talking the difference between gaining or losing weight can be a few hundred calories to 500 calories or so. That can be the difference between making or breaking your diet and the difference between being frustrated for weeks on end or actually making progress. And so that's why you can't rely on this in and of itself just alone. What you're going to have to do after you've calculated this number, first of all, assuming and try your best to be as accurate as you can with calculating these things and plugging in the information. My advice is if you're trying to lose weight, underestimate. Underestimate your activity. So rather than saying your moderate exercise, say you're light and so on, just that way you can build a little cushion in there, because the risk is if you overestimate, you don't lose weight. If you underestimate, you lose weight a bit faster. So that's not as bad of a thing. And so the same thing with body fat. It's very, very easy to underestimate and say, I'm super lean, I am at 8% body fat, when in reality you could be at 15%. So make sure you're building in a little bit of a cushion in there so that way you can try to make this thing a bit more accurate. And at the end of the day, regardless of what number shows up here and what you decide to do, you're going to need to put it into practice. You're going to need to eat that number of calories regularly and weigh yourself regularly so that way you can see, am I gaining weight? Am I losing weight? Okay, how much am I gaining? How much am I losing? Because ultimately, you're going to have to adjust. Your calorie needs are going to change over time depending on what you're doing, gaining or losing weight, how fast you're going, as well as it depends on what your goal is. So you're going to have to adjust to get that in line with your goal. Now, the simple thing is, give it 2 weeks, eat that number of calories, weigh yourself every single day, and weigh yourself first thing in the morning before you use the bathroom, or I'm sorry, after you use the bathroom, before you eat anything. That way you're getting at least a standard for when you're weighing yourself. The problem with weighing yourself later in the day or at different times of day, you got different food in your system, maybe you've used the bathroom, maybe you haven't used the bathroom yet, and so all of those compounding things will make your weight fluctuate that much more. Your weight will still fluctuate on a daily basis even if you're weighing yourself in the morning, but it won't be as significant, and at least you're doing it under the same conditions. So don't get too caught up in the day-to-day fluctuations, going up a pound here, down a pound there. You look more at the trend over time. And using something like MyFitnessPal, or if you're going to log your weight in Excel or something like that, if you want to be really fancy, you should be looking at the trend. Where did I start and where am I at and how has that changed over time to get a better grasp, a better idea. So that's in a nutshell some basic things to think about when it comes to those calorie calculators. Moving on to, even if once you figured out how many calories you have to eat and you're on track and you're losing, you will get to a point where you hit a weight loss plateau or weight gain plateau. And I could make a whole video on why that could happen, but essentially, things change. You don't always need the same number of calories over time. And so you're going to have to continue to adjust. And so that's why it's important to track and pay attention to those things, because that's going to help you to have the tools that you need in order to break through that plateau. If you were eating 2,000 calories a day and losing a pound a week, for example, and then all of a sudden after 2 or 3 weeks it stopped, you got to eat less than that or do more exercise to break through that plateau. So that's in a nutshell how you can use a calorie calculator to basically get an accurate number or more accurate number for your calorie intake. The second approach or second option, and this one is just as valid as the first, you don't need to use a calorie calculator. You can just track what you eat. Don't even necessarily have to set a goal. Just, I'm going to track whatever I eat on a daily basis. Do that for 2 weeks. Continue to weigh yourself every single day during that time period, and then go back and look at the numbers. How much on average was I eating? Some days you probably ate a bit more than other days, but you can kind of see, okay, at the beginning of the 2 weeks, I was at this weight and I was roughly eating this many calories. At the end, I weighed about this much. And so if you look at the averages, you can see how your weight has shifted and how it's changed. And so if on average you're eating 2,000 calories and you were gaining roughly a pound a week, you're in a pretty significant surplus. And so you're going to need to bring down your calories, shoot your calories down a bit to create that deficit. And also be mindful of things like your exercise and how many calories you're burning there, because those are some other variables too. There could be phases or periods of time in your work or in your exercise schedule routine where you're doing more exercise, you're burning more calories, and so that's causing you to potentially be losing weight if you're not offsetting that by eating more calories. And so that's where it can get frustrating when you're seeing changes with what you're doing, and then all of a sudden things start to slow down. There can be a lot of those little things here or there that add up. And so it's just important to be conscious of those things. Okay, so what's a good number of calories to eat if you're trying to lose weight? Well, it's kind of up to you. So good rule of thumb is try to lose about 1% of your body weight per week. It's not to say that you can't lose it faster than that. It's just you want to think about sustainability and what can you stick to long term. So initially, if you're someone who's really overweight and you've got a lot of weight to lose, you might be able to lose weight pretty quickly. Maybe you lose several pounds in the first few weeks or more than that. But over time, it might slow down. In essence, though, you want to keep in mind that you just have to make steady and consistent progress over a long period of time, and that'll add up to that bigger goal that you have with the overall weight loss. So I think a good rule of thumb for most people, probably about 1 to 2 pounds a week on average. Now, let's talk about the opposite. If you're trying to gain weight, how much of a calorie surplus do you need? Probably no more than 250 to 500 calories. And the reason for that is if you gain weight too quickly, you put on a lot more extra body fat and you won't necessarily put on more muscle mass. So it seems like you don't need that much of a calorie surplus to build muscle. At the largest end of the surplus, would not recommend more than about 500 calories surplus. 250 would be pretty modest. It gets very difficult to be super precise and accurate with measuring calories any less than that. So if you think you're in a 100 calorie surplus, it's very, very challenging to say for sure whether or not you're there or whether you're in a slight deficit. So there's kind of more of a fine line there. So if you're at least eating 300, 400, 500 calories above maintenance, you've got a pretty good shot that you're in enough of a surplus to be building muscle and not wasting any time. Now, as you become more advanced with lifting, you're typically not going to be building as much muscle and certainly not as quickly. And so less of a surplus is probably a good way to go, because you just don't want to put on a bunch of extra body fat for nothing, because it takes time and it's difficult to lose weight. And so better to set yourself up for success by not putting on as much body fat in the first place. In a nutshell, figure out how many calories you need to eat by using a calorie calculator or just tracking what you're eating. Have some data, track your weight for a good length of time, a week or two, and then adjust according to what you're doing. Remember, a 500 calorie surplus causes you to gain 1 pound a week. 500 calorie deficit causes you to lose 1 pound a week. If you can stick to some good round numbers like that, do your best to track and measure things as accurately as possible. you're going to be in a better spot. And even if you hit a point where you've been tracking and you've been trying really hard and things aren't working so well, and you've done that for a few weeks, that experience in and of itself has value. Weight loss and the number on the scale isn't the only measure of progress and isn't the only thing that has meaning or isn't the only way you can get better. You can get better by learning. You can get better by improving your skills at measuring and recording and tracking these things, being more mindful of your food choices. So all of those things are great ways to measure progress and great ways to improve yourself. And I'm not going to continue to go on a rant now. I think I've kind of said what I wanted to say, so hopefully that makes sense. Wanted to keep the video relatively short and touch on this topic because this is a question I get often, and I think it requires a thoughtful response. So hopefully this makes sense. Hopefully you've got, if you had some questions, this answered it. If not, feel free to leave some comments in the comments section down below. Feel free to subscribe if it was helpful for you, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next video.